What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Nvidia stock, ticker symbol NVDA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Wednesday, March 6th. All right, guys, Nvidia here today, up $7.27 a share, plus 0.85% with a nice late day move upside into the close. The stock is down a little less than 2 points after hours. Listen, as you guys will hear me say incredibly often, if you've been watching the channel for any period of time, by the way, if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. I do greatly appreciate it. But what we're looking at here in the after hours is volume is so incredibly low. Okay, so whether it's in your favor or going against your bias, always take that after hours movement with a grain of salt. But let's start here on Nvidia today with our daily volume profile analysis on the 5-minute chart here on the name from today's movement. This is where we can really try to kind of pull out some bias of the biggest sample size of the market to see if all moves were created equal today, so to speak. So looking here, what are we really looking for, right? Well, I'm looking for big changes in volume that correlate with an obvious move in stock price, but it has to be outside of what's normally contextual for that time of day. So big moves, I'm looking at that downside move, and then this big move into the close. The two most obvious moves I want to see, was there a bigger sample size that seemed to agree with that based on what we would expect? Now, this downside move, we typically expect the high point of the day is oftentimes the open, and then we see kind of like a U shape that ends up being typically lower on the close. So two things here. We clearly saw an increase in volume on that downside move. So you're probably going to see a lot of bears boasting tonight, you know, on the internet, whatever, about how they kind of won that downside move off the open. And I don't think they would be entirely wrong. However, into the close, we did see some out of context big volume, because typically, you know, I might expect to see a million, 1.2 million on the high side, 1.4 million shares. We saw that big candle after the close. Now on these big blue chips, we oftentimes do see that. And sometimes when we do see that, it could just be rebalancing, but I have to consider it and take it as we have it. We do see increased volume over what would be contextual into the close on that green upside move. So for me, I'm going to say this chart is kind of a net neutral given both of those scenarios here on the volume profile on the 5-minute today. Now let's move on here and take a look at levels to pay attention to tomorrow, starting with the 30-minute chart. Remember, these are all the self-fulfilling prophecy psychological levels. That's why I'm using the most popular indicators that we can possibly utilize on a very popular time frame, like the 30-minute. So I have the white line, the 50-period moving average, and the gray line, that is the 200-period moving average. I would say are and will be for a while the most popular indicators that we can basically put on any chart. And that means we're likely to see a high amount of volume and decision making around those levels, you know, hence the self-fulfilling prophecy that TA, I believe, is all around. Now, in yesterday's video, when we were looking at this 30-minute chart, we were talking about how any retest of this 50-period bulls, we were going to want to see a higher volume bounce, or at least respect. Okay. Now, we of course saw higher volume off the open. Now, if you look though contextually, it was actually equal what we saw last Friday and less than what we saw on Monday's open. So I would say, as far as the recent past, the open was kind of average volume today, but it wasn't below average, and we did hold that level. However, we struggled with it throughout the day, but we eventually popped up on reasonable volume into the close to hold that level, and we're currently sitting on top of that in the after hours. So listen, from a bullish perspective, what I'm really looking at tomorrow, Wednesday, is I would love to see an above average volume bounce up and away from the 50-period, a clean bounce. Today was not clean. I would ideally like to see a clean bounce and pull away up toward that high. And bears, I mean, as this 50-period comes higher and higher, you're dealing with a tighter and tighter channel between the stock and that all-time high. So ideally, you'd like to see a break downside on higher volume as quickly as possible, so this thing doesn't get any additional help from that psychological level of the 50-period on the 30-minute chart. Now, let's move on here to the 4-hour chart and take a look. You can see here that here on the 4-hour, the moving averages aren't quite as in play, but that 50-period is now up, heading toward $800 a share. You guys remember on Monday last night, we talked about just that happening. I said I would ideally, if I'm a bull looking at this, I would love to see Not a retest, of course, because that would mean a break. That would mean a big red day, right? So how does this chart stay relevant? Well, I'm always watching it, and I would want to see from a bullish perspective that 50 period aggressively curl upside and ideally get as close to $800 a share as soon as we possibly can. And it actually did just that. It curled upside at a quicker pace here just today on a Tuesday, and we're now at about 795, 794.50, 795. So looking ahead to tomorrow, I would love to see, and I think we likely will see, that 50 period pop up above $800 a share and just kind of add an additional psychological barrier between the stock and that huge psychological level of 8. If you're a bear looking at this, ideally, I'm not sure you can totally ask for a test of that in the very near term because you are looking at about a 7.5% move to the downside away. But you guys ideally would love to see that flatten out, whatever it may take, right at about $800 a share, if not a little below that. You ideally want as few psychological barriers between those big psychological levels that you're probably looking to break here as soon as possible. Now, let's move on here to the most important chart of all, and that's going to be the daily. Okay, the daily is going to paint the most obvious picture and tell us really what the majority of human beings are looking at, and algorithms, because the algorithms are just programmed by humans, and what we should be paying attention to here in the near term. And again, remember, when we're looking at the daily, we can't overcomplicate this, because the more we overcomplicate it, the less contextual we get, right? I want the story that has the most thought behind it, the most eyeballs, and the most people really considering and making decisions around, because that's how it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy that we know and love. I wouldn't want it any other way. So listen, this is the daily, so it's not going to show after our movement. We're at about 8:57 as of the time of this recording in after hours, but the close was at 8:59.64. So looking ahead here, the most obvious story in my head is kind of 3 numbers, okay? We have the round number of 800, but again, that's about 7.25% to the downside away. We have 900, which would imply a break of all-time high, but that is really the next big psychological level that I'm paying attention to aside from the all-time high. However, we've been seeing so many all-time highs as of late that I'm putting minimal psychological value on each all-time high and really just looking to the next psychological level, which in my opinion is $900 a share. But I think the real story here tomorrow is kind of like the battle of 850. Okay, we have 850 as of right now, and I want to see that thing hold if I'm a bull. Any downside test of it, I'm cool with, as long as we see an average or above average volume hold and bounce away from that level. Again, kind of use 850 as a trampoline to get us to finally push up through the all-time high and toward $900 a share. Bears, your number one goal here tomorrow, close below 850 on any volume that's not below average. Because I think we're probably going to need that boost if you're a bear, of 850 being a ceiling to kind of help push the stock down to the ultimate goal, which is, I think, in the near term to crack downside, make this a $700 stock again, at least below $800 a share. So that's what you guys are kind of looking for. Now, what was the bias out of the options traders today? This is the actual volume. This is all just from today as traders position themselves heading into tomorrow. We had 1.15 million total contracts, 701,000 calls, and 450,000 puts. So we are seeing an overall call bias on the overall call put ratio. Now, if we break this down by time frame, all the delta ranges, interestingly, every single delta range, out of the money, at the money, in the money, on average, that's going to be shorter term speculators, more mid-term and longer term sentiment. All the delta ranges are leaning to the call side. But what I really like to look at is that shorter term speculator delta range category. The 0 to 20 delta, 235,000 calls and about 203,000 puts. So a little more undecided than the overall call put ratio, but leaning slightly to the call side in that short-term speculation 0 to 20 delta range. Hope you guys got value out of that video. Listen, if you did, please subscribe to the channel. I'm covering NVIDIA stock every single day, and I'll see you tomorrow.